Sustainable Change Alliance Conversation on Homelessness. My name is Glenn Bacheller. I am a member of the Sustainable Change Alliance, and I've been a volunteer around homelessness for 10 plus years. For those who are not familiar with Social Change Alliance, it's an impact-oriented, member-based, not-for-profit educational group. We're focused on impact investing, which we define as bringing financial and other resources to organizations that are trying to address big social, environmental, and health-related issues, and trying to do it in a sustainable manner. Some of those organizations are for-profit, some are nonprofit, and some come from the independent sector. I'd like to just, before we get going, acknowledge the board members for Sustainable Change Alliance, which had a lot to do with today's meeting, and also all the members that are on the call, and especially to the sponsors of Sustainable Change Alliance. Our founding sponsors are Argyle Capital Partners, Maps.com, and UBS. Our platinum sponsor is Nixon Peabody Law Firm. Gold sponsor is JP Morgan Chase, and our silver sponsor is Bashir's Insurance. And the last plug for Sustainable Change Alliance will be that if you're not a member, we'd encourage you and your organization to join us on this journey. You can visit sustainablechangealliance.org where you can sign up as a member. Just a couple of things on logistics. The meeting is being recorded today and will be available on the SCA website. Everybody is mute except for the speakers today. But in the chat room, feel free to put in questions, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we possibly can. The purpose today is primarily to educate. However, secondarily, we are going to suggest a couple of ways in which those who might be interested can help. And thirdly, we will make, we'll talk very briefly about social impact possibilities down the road in terms of homelessness. And before I introduce our three speakers today, I just want to make a couple of comments from sort of 50,000 feet, if you will, because what we called today's discussion is what's working and what's coming. And you may be wondering, why would we say what's working for homelessness? And it's certainly not working for the homeless, and we certainly have big problems in the area in terms of homelessness. But we also want to share the perspective that we are doing some things right also. And I say that for several reasons. First, we have a large number of really good organizations and some really terrific people doing, thankless work with the homeless. And, we have three excellent examples of those types of people today on our call. The second thing is that, when you're working on homelessness and trying to judge it, it's all relative, because the macroeconomic issues are just so massive, namely inequality and lack of affordable housing, that it's really difficult to eliminate it or dramatically reduce it. Really, you're doing well if you sort of tread water in a lot of communities, particularly in California. And I share that because there was some data shared about a year ago that looked at the 50 counties in California that had data and how they were going up, down, or sideways in terms of homelessness. And of those 50 counties, only 8 of them were either flat or declining. And so everybody, and a lot of those were going up a lot. And Santa Barbara County, not Santa Barbara City necessarily, but Santa Barbara County, which we're a part, was one of those 8 communities. So the point is, we're doing something right. And then just the last thing I would say before we turn it over to our speakers is, having worked with homelessness for about 10 years, in my view, my observation has been that there's just no comparison to the way we're addressing homelessness as opposed to what we did 10 years ago. And I mean that in terms of strategy, I mean that in terms of systems, I mean it in terms of collaboration, partnerships, and especially data. All of those areas, there's just no comparison. And of course, we have to get better and better all the time because, again, those macroeconomic trends are just so vast that you really have to speed up improvement as much as you can. And there's certainly lots of room for improvement as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce our 3 speakers for today and let them say a word or two about themselves and their organizations. And I'll first start with Alice Villarreal Redit, who is the Supervisor Services, Resident Supervisor Services for the Housing Authority. Alice, maybe you could just say a little bit about what you do and you know, what the Housing Authority is focused on these days.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. The Housing Authority has been in our community for 50 years, and for the past 25 years, focused on addressing the crisis of homelessness. I've been with the agency a really long time, and I'm coming to you live from one of our permanent supportive housing sites, where I do double duty as the on-site manager, and I live here with my family. And this is Johnson Court, our newest development for homeless veterans. I think just really quickly, there's three main ways that our agency addresses homelessness. That's through creating permanent supportive housing, by providing rental subsidy, and housing retention or supportive services programs. So those are kind of the three main ways that we address that issue. And we have a new site coming online soon, hopefully, on Coda Street.
Mm-hmm. And Alice's perspective is really terrific here because she has been working in the homeless area in Santa Barbara for quite some time, so she brings a lot of breadth and depth in terms of the homelessness. Our second speaker is Brad Fieldhouse, and he is relatively new to our area, working for CityNet. And I think that's especially important as well because he brings us a vast experience from other communities within California to Santa Barbara. So I'll hand it over to Brad, and you can talk a little bit about what you and CityNet are doing.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and pleasure to be with y'all this afternoon and for this really important conversation. I'm the founder and executive director of a nonprofit called CityNet. I actually founded the organization in 2003. So I've been doing this ever since professionally. Before that, I was a pastor of a local church. So someone might come from is peanut butter and jelly sandwiches down at the local park. Learned lots of things that are helpful and some that are not necessarily helpful in terms of sort of helping to end homelessness. CityNet we're 130 plus strong homeless, full service homeless organization. We work across 4 counties: Riverside, LA, Orange County, and Santa Barbara County. We're involved in a lot of direct service. We operate 5 shelters, from a 20-person COVID quarantine facility all the way up to a 425-bed emergency walk-up shelter in Santa Ana. And we are part of the Santa Barbara project that's called Connect Home. So we work with the City of Santa Barbara Police Department, Santa Barbara Housing Authority, Fire and Rescue, and sort of what this grant is focusing on is sort of the high utilizers of emergency services. I live locally, actually. My office is in Anaheim, but I live here locally and spend a few days of my week down south. So we're part of that team focusing on those high utilizers of emergency services. Pleasure to be a part.
Great. Thank you, Brad. And last but not least, Jeff Shaffer, much like Alice, has been working in the Santa Barbara homeless community for a long time with a number of different organizations. And right now he is the director of initiative, which I'm taking as a definition, meaning he does pretty much everything for Santa Barbara ACT. So Jeff, can you tell a little bit about what you and Santa Barbara ACT are doing?
Yeah, I'm the director of initiatives and co-founder of SB ACT. I've been working in the homeless arena for 15 years. Similar to Brad, started in 2005. Started the Pershing Park meal sharing with a few friends, bringing food, spaghetti to the park, and that's kind of how I had my start. We work with and for the marginalized. We do not do direct outreach, but we do the collective impact model. So we currently have 3 collaboratives. We have one around the Human Trafficking Task Force working to help survivors of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. We have a Westside Health Collaborative, and then we have a homeless collaborative we've developed in partnership with the Santa Barbara Foundation and the City of Santa Barbara to really look at reducing the impacts and homelessness long-term sustainably in specific to Santa Barbara City. So I'm very excited about the new work we're doing, which is really just focused on the city and getting to work with people like Alice and Glenn and Brad.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I'm going to ask a few questions to our three speakers, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions from everyone else also. But and the first one I'm going to ask for Alice, which is just to really describe homelessness in Santa Barbara, if you would, and because there may be some people on the call that are not especially knowledgeable about it. So just maybe give them a 25,000-foot view, if you will, just for starters. And we want this to be more of a discussion. So Jeff or Brad, feel free to jump in, as well. Alice?
Well, I know that the point-in-time count data was recently released, and there's nearly 2,000 households throughout the county, about half of which are in Santa Barbara, struggling with homelessness. And it's, this is not a homogeneous group of people. This could be families that are newly homeless, that have been homeless for relatively short periods of time, especially, in light of the pandemic, all the way to are chronically homeless. That in our community, we have a lot of senior citizens that, here at this property as well, that have been homeless for many, many decades, if not longer. And so I think, it's hard to, we shouldn't think about it in terms of just one homogeneous population. That I think the needs and the challenges are as varied as the people that we're helping.
Jeff, I know you wanted to talk more specifically about chronically and vulnerable homeless. Maybe you could add to what Alice said from that, because I know that's a big segment of Santa Barbara City in particular.
Yeah, that's really where I've had a passion about kind of, solving that area of homelessness for a while, because really Pershing Park, where I started, that's where the most of the people, the chronic population, came to the park for the meal. So we're talking about, if we look at our unsheltered number in Santa Barbara City, the number is probably around 500 to 600 individuals. According to the point in time data, about 69% of the population in the city is what we call chronic, meaning they've been homeless for a year, at least a year or more, or 3 times in 1 year. They have a maybe trimorbidity, they're dealing with mental health issues or maybe addiction. And a lot of our individuals, it's been 6 to 15 years. So you're talking about a population highly vulnerable, and you're talking about maybe 400 individuals in our city who you would term chronic, meaning that when you talk about the solutions, the solutions have to be sustainable, coordinated outreach with partners like Public Health, Be Well, CityNet, and then you have to have this system in place from the shelters to permanent housing with the right supports, so that we can help people get into housing that have been out there for a while. I can speak specifically to an individual this year who's been homeless for about 20 years. CityNet, different AmeriCorps members got to know him on state. It was time for him to deal with the issues he wanted to deal with. He's now a Salvation Army, and has been there for a year and is looking for housing. So you're talking about people who've been out there for a while, but they want help. And that's the good news. Is I think there's a myth out there that the people that have been out there the longest are saying no to everything. And really they're not. It's just you have to have the right team in place to help them navigate the system and meet their immediate needs.
Brad, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on Jeff's just recent comment. I mean, so we've done some pretty high profile projects, not necessarily in Santa Barbara, but for example, there was a big encampment in Southern California by Anaheim Stadium. And sort of the question of, who's interested in help was an encampment that we were the lead agency to clear out. And 83% of the folks, when you sort of sit down with them and you said, hey, whether they're chronic or been homeless for 2 weeks, sort of really do express like, this was never my intention to end up here. Maybe the decisions that I made or whatever systems got me here, whatever breakdown happened in my life, or whatever inability I experienced in order to sort of self-eject myself from this current situation. We see most of the folks are actually very interested in getting help. And we've seen that number consistently across, as long as I've been working, in the 80 to high 80% right out the gate with those trust relationships. I think, COVID is sort of an interesting dynamic. If I could just sort of maybe kind of go down that road for a second. I mean, obviously the good news is that at least in California, there have not been, and in Santa Barbara, there have not been breakouts, if you will, sort of as it relates to COVID in sort of the homeless population. There have been cases for sure. But I think sort of the impacts of COVID, and for maybe a number of reasons, because it's a particularly vulnerable population, is, some of it's, because they're kind of frankly self-isolating themselves, just like the rest of us are doing. They're kind of finding some spaces to sort of kind of protect themselves by being away from others. I don't have any local data, but one of the shelters we operate, for example, just as an illustrative point, is we operate in Santa Ana a 425-bed emergency low threshold shelter. It's the only walk-up facility in Orange County, and the capacity is 425 beds. Last night, we had 169 people only. So people are choosing to not even take advantage of sort of what they perceive as an unsafe environment. And they're choosing to sort of go find a nook and a cranny somewhere to self-isolate. And we've seen that, our teams have seen that here in Santa Barbara. I know I've talked to many people on the streets here who are doing the same thing. The county is doing some projects like Project Room Keys, kind of a big national, it's a big effort. I just got the number today. There's 63 guests that are sort of at-risk population, sort of over 65 and or underlying health conditions that are in that. There's 63 people in an isolation facility. Project Room Key, that's the name of it. You may have heard about that on the news. There's 63 people in there. And in addition to that, CityNet is bridging, which means we're essentially putting up in a motel and providing case management, an additional 26 people from the streets of Santa Barbara. So there are people that are sort of kind of self-isolating themselves. It's, it does keep them safe, and it allows us to sort of provide case management. Some of those folks, you may have heard about the Cacique Bridge project. There was a number of folks sort of living under there, and due to the proximity, a number of the folks we're bridging actually came out from underneath that bridge. So COVID is sort of just kind of exacerbated, as well as the limitations of getting people into shelters because staff members are, potentially COVID. So there's some dynamics that are challenging the system in these difficult days, unfortunately. But we're doing our best out there.
Right. Brad, maybe just to follow up on the discussion about COVID-19, obviously there are some protections out there right now in terms of eviction protection, unemployment protection, things like that are likely to lapse in the not too distant future. What are some of the expectations that may be coming if and when those things lapse?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of speaks to the challenge of the almost homeless population. I mean, the reality is as Jeff was alluding to, is the almost homeless population is much more significant in size than the actual homeless population. And a lot of people have sort of episodal homelessness throughout a year, particularly late in the month when they run out. And there's a lot of people, honestly, unfortunately, that sort of are, as I'll say, one paycheck, one punch, or one sickness away from ending up on the streets because their safety net is as robust as, say, maybe mine or others. And there are things that are happening. Obviously, that Project Room Key that I was talking about, there's lots of conversation happening statewide about, okay, how do we not just like close those locations and just send everybody back out to the streets? So there's a lot of things happening, a lot of coordination behind the scenes to sort of kind of do what we can in the meantime to both prevent people from rental assistance and things like that so they can keep from becoming homeless, but also those that have been sort of housed recently, kind of work with them to sort of get into a better next step than just heading back to the streets. That's going to take some significant resource. There's lots of conversations going on around that. I just heard in the governor's budget, again on a call literally a couple of hours ago, $900 million by the government for Project Home Key. That's the first time I've heard that word mentioned, but Project Home Key, which is a follow-up to Project Room Key. So it's sort of this big idea of sort of doing whatever it takes statewide. But that's a Herculean task ahead of us here, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to insert here a question from Matt Riley, and I know Barbara typed in a little bit of an answer as well. But the question is regarding school-age children. It's a large number of school-age children that are homeless. And can one of the three of you speak to that? What types of options are out there for that, and what are some of the things being done to try to address that?
So I know I'll speak briefly to, I think some of the data is regarding doubled and tripled up families. So I think our county is the third highest level of homelessness regarding youth and children now. So the number is large in a lot of ways because that's insecure housing numbers for children and youth. And I know the numbers in Lompoc and in Santa Maria regarding families are going up. I mean, that's one thing our pointing type data has kind of shown us consistently, is that is an issue that we need to look at. And I just want to say there's two bookends when you talk about homelessness and what you see on the streets. You've also got to stop the bleeding with retention. You got to do a good job with retention and keeping people housed. And then there's diversion. You have to do these other strategies with reunification and other issues just to keep people from getting caught in our system and being stuck here forever, but finding them better outcomes somewhere else is often useful. I don't know if Alice, you had anything about the children numbers.
I mean, I would just say, families are the largest population that we serve at the Housing Authority. Most of our programs, most of our different housing programs provide subsidy. We're actively doing eligibility appointments right now. We received more funding than predicted. And so, but mainly we help families through the Section 8 rental subsidy program. And just as kind of a side note, in the month of April alone, we did 400 rent reductions, virtually or over the telephone. And so by having the stability of the Section 8 program, to me, that's 400 potential evictions or displacements, homelessness that was prevented. And, the Section 8 program gives us the ability to quickly and easily adjust people's rent. So I think all of these programs are so important.
And I'll jump in also on the children question a little bit. I'm involved with an organization called Partners in Housing Solutions, which is working with landlords to house homeless people. And we focus on veterans and on families. And in the last 4+ years, housed almost 600 homeless people, and more than half of that is children. So that, also obviously these are families with children, and there are other programs out there like that are focusing on families. But obviously we got a lot more work to do. Next question I just asked, and you started to touch on it, Jeff, and maybe we can just continue on it, is, what are the things that we're doing well, and what are the things that we really need to do better at? Just from where are the gaps really? Because it's really what I'm talking about, in terms of both doing well and maybe we could do more of. And you started to talk about that. Maybe you can expand on it.
So I learned this little 4-step thing, real simple, from Becky Canis Margiali years ago with 100,000 Homes campaign. And I'll throw it out to you, and it'll talk about the 2 things we're doing well and 2 things we need to work on. So there are 4 steps to reducing homelessness. First step is know everyone by name. Somebody has to know everyone experiencing homelessness, whether they live in a vehicle, in a camp, at a beach. Somebody has to know who they are. That's the first start. Second step is know what they want and what they need. That's when you start to get into the case management level, the coordinated outreach level, and the database. So you begin to talk to people about what they want first, because you may think you know what they need, but if they don't want that, that's not where you're going to start. You're going to start with, hey, you want a sandwich, you want a friend, whatever that is. We have done much better over the past, I would say, 5 years with those 2 steps, because we do have coordinated outreach throughout the county. We do have AmeriCorps, we do have CityNet, we do have Home for Good, we do have all these teams of outreach, Be Well, Public Health, all doing some level of outreach. So we're getting to know people, and we have the HMIS, Homeless Management Information System database, where all that data is now being able to be collected. We have a much better look at data. So we actually can look at data and see, do people need permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing or diversion? So that's great. The next 2 steps are building and aligning capacity of all the services you need. And that's where you start to see the lack. So you start to see people living in vehicles that can't find parking spaces. You start to see families looking for housing, can't find housing. You start to see a shortage of shelter beds. So as we get coordinated outreach going, And we're getting to know people, building rapport, and they say, yeah, I'm ready for services. We don't have everywhere for them to go. So if you look at what kind of the HMIS data is telling us we need in Santa Barbara City, it's 200 more shelter beds. And then we need at least 400 more permanent supported housing units. And as you look at what's kind of happened over the past couple of years and how people feel about costs on Path and in the community and shelters, there's a lot of overcoming that needs to be done with the business community and neighborhoods, winning them over to actually being on board with us when we start talking about, hey, we need 200 more shelter beds. We need to find places for these beds, and we need to build these new units, or we need to do strategic ways of finding new units, kind of like what Glenn has talked about within Partners in Housing Solutions, being able to find scattered site units. So to me, it's steps 3 and 4. And a lot of our work right now is getting the neighborhood and business partners to come on board and get educated so that when housing opportunities or new shelter bed opportunities come forward, we get the entire community behind them, because we really need to work on building that.
Okay. We have a couple of questions here that I just want to get to, and you did touch on it a little bit, Jeff, and maybe Alice and Brett can add to it, but can you talk about the challenges developing relevant housing in our community? That sounds like a housing authority question if I ever heard one.
Well, I think, the real estate opportunities drive the developments, and, recently the Housing Authority purchased what would have been an AUD project on East Coda Street. It's going to be converted from what would have been 14 two-bedroom units to 30 studio units for the homeless. And I think it's in a really good neighborhood. It's in a commercial area. It's been a challenge for us to develop more family housing. We're focused at the moment on creating more workforce housing, working with the city on that, and focused on, working with faith communities and looking at publicly owned land to be able to acquire more properties. But I think, context is everything. It's so important to really think about the neighborhood in which we're putting these properties. And, here at Johnson Court, we're in a very densely residential neighborhood, and it's requiring just a lot of communication with the neighbors in the neighborhood. And I think each and every project is so unique because of where it's placed, because of who gets housed, because of the number of units. And all of these partnerships are so important to making sure that things work. I don't know if that answered your question, Glenn.
No, that's great. And there's a related question here also that says, are there any options with vacant retail and commercial space? Because obviously that's going to become more and more prevalent. What are the opportunities there?
Yeah, I'm playing third string here for Rob, our CEO, so he'd be able to address that much more eloquently than me. But I think the short answer is, of course, there's opportunities, and it's just getting our public officials to be flexible and creative. Brad or Jeff, I don't know.
Okay. And there's another question here. It's about, it's sort of an add-on to COVID-19, if you will, but other types of disasters like fires, extreme storms, heat waves, et cetera. How does that impact the overall, the most at-risk population and the homeless? Can someone speak to that?
I took a stab at it a minute ago, but sort of kind of focusing on it is I do think that, there's obviously, various funding sources that get open. So there are more beds available that weren't available, like the Project Room Key. I mean, there are, we were able to change our grant deliverables, which is pretty historic actually from a government grant perspective, with very highly managed. They just basically kind of threw our game plan wide open and said, let's get these people safe, get them indoors. And we're even applying for FEMA dollars to reimburse. So from a flow of funding standpoint, there has been a huge effort here in Santa Barbara County to get those folks off the streets and isolated, which has been great, particularly those that are at health risks. And there's a lot of coordination going on to support those individuals, that we're not just putting them in motel rooms. There's a lot of care that's going on there. Yeah, including, I mean, Cottage Hospital, I didn't mention, I think I forgot them actually. So part of our grant is Cottage Hospital. They are working with us. They are embedded in our project. We have staff from the hospital that are part of our project. So speaking from the outreach side of things and those that we're working with, we have direct support from, you know, Be Well, Public Health, Cottage Hospital, on and on and on.
I know we did a pilot project in Santa Maria working with Marion and Dignity to work with a list of top 20 high utilizers for Marion Hospital, and housed one individual that cost their system $600,000 in 1 year. So I think partnerships, when you work with healthcare, need to happen, and cross-sector funding, they funded our case manager. So I think that's really important to work with the holistic system when you're working with individuals and families.
Kind of speaking to the idea of sort of the allocation or designation or the building of housing, I mean, one of the challenges that it's a Herculean effort, although there's lots of willing partners who are wanting to jump in as terms of building, retrofitting, running, and supporting, but sort of siting and finding the locations. I've been involved in many, many meetings, including some very lively ones here in Santa Barbara, with sort of, you know, so I guess that the opportunity or the challenge for a group like this that's leaning in and trying to learn more about homelessness in general and understanding the dynamics behind it, is sort of lending your voice of support. In our world, we talk about a couple different types of folks that we're trying to get to be an informed ally that sort of said, look, we recognize this is a challenge. It used to be the NIMBYism. That was the word that was sort of out there, right? This is a great thing. We need to do it somewhere, just not in my backyard. That's what NIMBY stands for. The new phrase that's being kind of thrown around is bananas, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. And so it's sort of this idea of, you know, be a great place is Palmdale or something like that, where we recognize that most of these folks are actually from here. They've got roots here, jobs here, their doctors are here, they've been here, they know this area, and they may know nobody in Palmdale, for example, and go, why would I want to go to Palmdale when all my support systems are here? So sort of lending your voice of advocacy, even conveying various concerns, as long as it's done well and it's run right, and you have, you know, people that can operate them correctly, to lend your voice and support, because there are many, many times where good ideas that are already funded come before and they get shot down out of concerns that don't get addressed, or facts that don't get sort of kind of put out there to back a project like those.
Yeah, I would like to piggyback on that quickly, because I think that's an area that we did not, as providers, I'm not speaking for the Housing Authority because they always do a good job when they're working on a housing project, but sometimes as providers, we go to using words like NIMBY, and we haven't gone to the community and got their buy-in at the start, and we haven't won them over, and we haven't trained them and informed them. So I think one thing we're seeing through the creation of regional action plans, both on the East Side and State Street, and business community members joining us for those regional action plans, is they're beginning to see data, learn how difficult it is to actually find housing, and they're beginning to rally to advocate for housing within their community. And we're turning the tide on that, and I'm pretty excited that that tide is turning. If we're going to move anywhere toward the creation of 200 new units, we have to have community buy-in.
Great, thanks. And we also have a question about, have any of our speakers had time to read through the Santa Barbara County Grand Jury report that just came out this week? I think it was in the Independent Online just the last day or so. I've had a chance to read it once. How about the others?
I had a chance to skim it, and I think one of the things that's compelling is obviously no big surprise that we have an affordable housing shortage in Santa Barbara, and we're very focused on adding units. But I think when people of means can't find a place to live, just imagine the impacts on our poor and working classes. And no big surprise that homelessness is a crisis in our community. So I just think we need more housing of all types. And and all descriptions. And we need to really create a robust continuum of housing options for all ages and all incomes. And it's not just one type of housing that's needed. Obviously, more rental housing is needed, and I think the report said that Santa Barbara County ranks like we're the third highest in terms of our renters being cost burdened. So
yeah, we're creating a common agenda. We have a steering committee with 18 different members. We're creating a common agenda. We'll have a housing and shelter working group. And again, I would just have to say, we're also at a unique point with the city council where they're moving on things where really they haven't necessarily done so in the past. So I think using the action points that I asked for in this report, as well as getting the business community, service providers, city council all aligned and actually saying, here's the plan, making it very business-centered approach. How are we going to get to 200 units for low income? Those are the conversations and meetings that need to get started.
I'm going to just add on to something that Jeff talked about a few minutes ago, and that's in regards to prevention and diversion, which is basically when someone becomes homeless, to almost immediately get them out of homelessness before they get too entrenched, if you will. And you may or may not be familiar with Los Angeles, but Los Angeles has had a lot of extra money in recent years. They added to their sales tax. I think it's to the tune of about $350 million a year that all goes to homelessness. And they had a bond issue that was about $1.2 or $1.4 billion to build more things. And they've been very, very active in the last 3 or 4 years, building more units than they've ever built before and housing more people than they've ever housed before. Yet their homelessness numbers have gone up even more than before, double-digit increases. And what they're learning, and what I think it points to, is that you really need to work both ends of the homelessness system. You can't just be working on housing and building units, and the outflow, if you will. You have to work on the inflow. And data that I've seen in the last 6 months or so showed that in our county, there's about 2,200 people that come into the homeless system every year. So if you could make that number 1,900 or 1,800 or 2,000 and did that for a number of years in a row, that could make a huge difference in terms of the costs on the system, first of all, but second of all, in the overall numbers. And I know Jeff, the Santa Barbara Act's doing some work related to that, and there's some projects being worked on from a prevention standpoint. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, first I'll touch on diversion, because I believe you could reduce the homeless population by 10% just by putting diversion into play every day. And I'm going to throw it over to Brad because they're doing that right now very actively. But one of my favorite stories, it's about $300 a person when you talk about diversion. And one of my favorite stories is I did stock outreach one day on State Street with a band of junior high kids. And we ran into a young couple on the streets that, actually an older couple on the streets that he had a job at a circus in LA and housing. And they needed like $280 just to get there. And we called the other end. We confirmed that a job was there. And the junior high kids raised the $280 going to their families to get this couple reunified and with a job and with housing. So I think that's our smartest financial way to go. You got to make sure you're doing good work on the other end to make sure it's a place, a family that will accept them back, or a service provider, and it's all legit. But to me, that's just smart sense. And Brad, I'm sure you have something to share about diversion as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the reality is a staggering number, since we're sort of kind of driven by stats in these days in the homeless causes. So California, 27% of the homeless population in the United States, 27% of the homeless population in the United States is in California. And you feel that when you drive around, you sort of see it's like, where in the world and what's going on? And it is ultimately tied to either the cost of housing, the jobs that can afford that housing, or a breakdown of your family systems. And as Jeff was saying, we do that on a regular basis. We always check with law enforcement so we don't send somebody where they're not supposed to be, or enable them to leave a place where they are supposed to be if they need to be here for some legal reason or something. But diversions is a very easy way to sort of help undergird somebody who's kind of hit rough times in their support system, which is the third thing, for the top reasons why people become homeless. So if you could step in and kind of help support them in the transition so that they don't stay on the streets for a long time and develop traumatic experiences and or become chronic homeless by being out for more than a year. Diversions is a great way. We use what we call the Hope Fund, which is essentially a fund we use. So it's whatever it takes resources, literally whatever it takes, whenever it's needed to do what's necessary. And we do that all the time. And I've actually seen quite a few people from State Street sort of reunited or reconnected with resources outside of the immediate county.
Brad, we had a question here about what is diversion. Maybe you could give a couple of examples of how you would divert somebody so people could understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, so it could be as simple as somebody who came out here, was employed, lost their job, or something happened and they lost their housing and they wanted to go back to where they were from. Maybe they have family that's back in Florida. And so what we may do is, so to sort of assist them and support them, we may buy the Amtrak train ticket. We might put them up in a motel room and allow them to get a good night's sleep so they're refreshed, they could take a shower, they could wash their clothes, and then they would sort of jump on an airplane, maybe that they paid for the ticket. Simple things like that, that sort of help basic needs and stabilize somebody so that a cascade of negative things doesn't begin. So diversion would be kind of keeping them preferably from becoming homeless in a more dire situation.
Great, thank you. We also have a question about veteran homelessness. Obviously, that's something that it hurts the community, just hurts the heart, if you will. A veteran is homeless as well. Could someone speak to about veteran homelessness and what we've done? I know nationally there's been a lot of progress in terms of reducing veteran homelessness, but there's obviously more to be done. Can someone speak to that, please?
I can share.
Alice would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm literally, at our permanent supportive housing development for veterans, 16 studio units, the first of its kind in the city of Santa Barbara. So this is, something we were able to pull together. All of the residents have project-based Section 8 rental assistance, and we have on-site services through New Beginnings. On all of our waiting lists, veterans get a preference. So, our senior units, any senior veteran that's applying generally gets housed fairly quickly. So veterans will always get sort of the most points, so to speak, on our waiting list. And I guess one thing I'll share is it takes a lot of collaboration and a lot of work to keep people housed. So it's fairly straightforward, not to say that it's easy, but it's straightforward in terms of our agency knows how to design and build and fund permanent supportive housing. We've got that formula figured out. It's very, very time intensive to keep people housed. And I think when a few minutes ago you talked about working both ends of the spectrum, I think something that doesn't get talked about enough is regression. It's fairly straightforward to get people housed. Keeping them housed when they decompensate or they're failing, for lack of a better word, in their placement, that's something that as a community we need to spend a lot more time talking about, because what happens is, whose client is it? Everyone sort of looks to the other, when things start to fall apart, and we need to make sure that once people are placed into housing, if those placements don't end up working out for whatever reason, it shouldn't be that people are returning to the streets. And that's where that continues.
Just add another point in terms of veterans and just prioritization overall. I mean, it's a given that the resources to address homelessness are nowhere near the demand or the challenge, if you will. And so really it comes down to focusing and prioritizing. And a lot of communities, this one as well, prioritize in a lot of ways. And that's why there's been quite a big reduction in terms of veteran homelessness, because there's been a lot of focus and a lot of money that's gone in that direction. And secondly, there's been a fair amount in terms of children and families as well. And oh, by the way, landlords are much more open to housing housing veterans or housing families than they are individuals. So it works that well as well. So, but you really need to sort of pick and focus and prioritize, and that certainly has worked with veterans, although there's still more to do. Brad, I thought maybe you could talk for a moment or two about how people might be able to help. There's obviously lots of different ways, and I know you have a few ideas.
Yeah, this is so spending a lot of time in a lot of different communities and a lot of city meetings and lots of conversations like these. I sort of have a couple thoughts, and so one is to get educated and sort of learn more. This is a complicated issue, so what you're doing today is a perfect example. Sort of kind of leaning in on the conversation and trying to sort of get your head around sort of what are some of the, what is going on in California? Why is the cost of housing so high that nobody can afford, whether they're graduating from the local university or they're experiencing homelessness? Those sorts of reasons. So one would be learn. I do have a couple of resources that I'd like to throw out. And Barbara, I think I sent you the links. I wonder if you could throw them in there. But just these are some of my favorites. I recommend them all the time. But for those of you that want to go down this rabbit hole a little deeper and learn some things, the first one would be a cost study. Because I think one of the realities is like, how do we steward the limited resources we have to resolve homelessness? And Orange County partnered with UC Irvine and did a national study that we were involved in, sort of the fiscal impacts of homelessness. And I would recommend that to anybody. There's the link right there. It's executive summary. It's only 13 pages. You won't get lost in a bunch of nonprofit gobbledygook. It's truly, how do we solve this from a financial perspective and why we should get involved? Malcolm Gladwell writes a lot about these types of things. He talks about an individual $1 million Murray. It's another example of sort of like how we spend a lot of money managing a problem and not solving a problem. I think sort of promoting and getting behind solutions narratives for cities like we're talking about here is real important for people that are not in the space, like many of you on this call who don't do this for a living. It's real important for voices like yours to speak into the context of that we're talking about. And my last one from a resource, and then is, this comes from a faith-based world. I come from a faith-based world. One of the books that I pass out to a lot of groups that I speak to is When Helping Hurts. It's a book by a friend of mine, Brian Fickert. He wrote a book, and it sort of speaks to what could we be considering from a lot of these organizations that are looking for something to do. So a little bit of words of caution, if you will. So that's a book that I would recommend. It's a great study. I'd encourage people to give. You don't have to give to CityNet per se, but this is a resource problem ultimately. The reason why veterans homelessness goes down is because we're dedicating resource to it. Similarly, this is a resource deficiency challenge. And so I encourage people to invest their time, talent, and treasure behind either the cause in general or specific organizations that are out there on the front lines, or infrastructure and investing. So that'd be the sort of the last piece, is invest your strong voice to help move policy. I consider it a privilege that using my voice to speak at city council meetings, which I had never done forever in my life until I really got involved in helping not just to promote solutions, but to give political leaders the courage to make really strong, good decisions. It's sometimes you can move millions of dollars towards solutions by going and speaking, and you don't have to, you don't have to raise that money yourself per se. You could sort of help shape public policy. And then obviously investing in housing. Housing is the answer to ending homelessness, all kinds of housing. Exactly. So for some of you who are sort of, and even this group, as you guys think of sort of creative solutions to address some of the underlying housing concerns in the community, I think we need outside the box thinking from really smart, strategic people and generous people who are willing to give their time and money to build out the housing stock. Because we do know the priorities that are out on the street. It's just a matter of lining up those needs with resources as it relates to housing. So get informed, give your time, get involved, kind of roll up your sleeves, give financially, and as well as sort of some of these big ideas as it relates to housing. There's just some thoughts.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brad. And since Sustainable Change Alliance is a social impact investing group, I want to just touch on that subject for a moment. And I know Alice, the Housing Authority is always looking at various alternative funding alternatives, you know, in terms of being able to build and from the real estate standpoint. Is there anything you could add to that in terms of, you know, what could be coming down the pike in terms of different ways of funding?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously it takes many, many millions, usually at least 10 million to develop our properties. And we almost always rely on the low-income housing tax credit program through the state. But having, you know, social impact dollars can be really helpful. If a land acquisition fund were to be created, how that helps the Housing Authority is helping us tie up properties that come available immediately, helping us acquire the properties in the first place. Obviously, it can take years and, you know, a large amount of money to actually develop the properties, but having a fund from local philanthropy, that's one way that groups like yours can help efforts like ours.
And just to tag on with what Alice was saying, there was a group that was working pretty hard on this and was pretty close to developing a program, working with the Housing Authority and with others. But it came to a screeching halt, obviously, about 3 or 4 months ago for obvious reasons. And now is probably not the best time to launch something like that. So I think down the road, it's very possible. We'd love to be able to come back to the Sustainable Change Alliance with a program that would make sense, that would, you know, let people really make an investment and do some good in the community and maybe get a little bit of a return as well. So that's a little bit of a tease for down the road, if you will. Any other comments from any of our speakers? We're very close to near the end of the time. We want to be prompt and be within the hour. Jeff, Brad, Alice, maybe each should make a last comment.
I'll briefly say, I think we need to end the culture of finger pointing and a blame culture and move toward a culture of pronoia. And that is, pronoia means it's the opposite of paranoid. It means the universe is working for us. And we need to all work together. We know what to do and how to do it. That's not the question. So if we all get aligned and pulling in the same direction, I think we're going to drop the number and we're going to help more people. You know, there's nothing, a majority of the friends at Pershing Park that I had died at the park, right? There's no reason for that in America. So if we pull together, I think we can do this.
Great. Brad and Alice?
I agree with what Jeff said. I won't sort of but I do think that I think we are at a very interesting point in the life of the city here, is that I think there are things that are aligning and there's a receptivity and an openness. And so I think there is, and this is, you know, it's always an uphill battle, but I think there's a window of opportunity that for those that you on this call and or those that you may know who aren't on this call, but are in your circle of influence, I do think that this is a window to be paying attention specifically, because I do think that there's a lot of opportunities and resources and focus and political and community will currently to address this issue in this city. And we could be a leader in this space in a city, in a state that's facing tremendous challenges. So I would just sort of stress the sense of urgency for such a time as this.
Great.
Love to have a partnership.
I think just quickly, the crisis of homelessness is a multi-sector issue. I appreciate that groups like yours are digging deeper. I appreciate groups like SCA that's aligning all of the local efforts from all of the different partners. It's not just housing developers, it's not just government, it's community members, it's a faith community, philanthropy, business experts. This has all been just seeing those different sectors represented. It's really heartwarming and gives me a lot of hope because there's just no way to solve this without everyone's participation. So thank you for all that you do.
Great. Well, I think it's always good to end a call with some hope and some sense of urgency and some optimism. I think that's terrific, because we do know that there's huge challenges coming in terms of the COVID-19 and how that will affect us. But again, as Brad said, you know, people may rise to the occasion and it may be an opportunity for us. But I want to really thank our three speakers. I think they did an absolutely terrific job. And even more important than that, what they do every single day in the community. It's really amazing and it's quite understated, you know, in their introductions today. And thank everybody on the call for first of all being concerned and interested about homelessness. And if you're so inclined to get involved either with the Sustainable Change Alliance and or with homelessness, that would be terrific. And I hope everybody has a wonderful and safe 4th of July holiday. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.